What's up, guys? Duma here, and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at the Magic Online, sometimes paper results. Spoiler alert, we do have quite a bit of paper results this week, and we just kind of compile all the data together and take a look and see what the metagame is, a little bit of spice along the way, which we do have a little bit more of it this time. I did see your comments on last week's video, and I tried to split it up, showing two winners and two more of the on the spicy side of things. So I think we're going to go back to a slightly different formula. We'll show one winner or deck that is performing very well, and then three maybe more on the spicy side of things, not necessarily decks you could consider, tier 1 meta threats, just to make sure that we have a little bit of everything going on here. Because I do still want to highlight at least one deck that is performing well. And we are actually going to start off with Standard today. I know we usually start off with Modern, but there's a lot to talk about in Modern, so I kind of want to get through Standard and Pioneer maybe a little bit quicker than we usually do, and then we're going to spend a little bit more time on Modern this week, as there was 8 challenges and 3 regional championships. So with Standard, here is your metagame breakdown, and it looks standard-ish. You'll notice that there is definitely some churn from week to week. Biggest example here is Esper Pixie, about half of what it was last week, and Dimir Bounce, more than double of what it was last week. So it seems like a lot of people who were playing Esper before have kind of defaulted to Dimir, which is playing a lot of the same cards as the Esper deck in terms of Storm Chaser's talent, Nowhere to Run, This Town Ain't Big Enough, Fear of Isolation, that core bounce shell, but you get a much better mana base, you have a better red matchup, arguably a very, very good red matchup, whereas Pixie has a more rough sledding of it. Other than Pixie players swapping to blue-black, not a ton else has changed here. Gruul prowess, roughly about the same. Golgari took a pretty big dip, about half of what it was last week. Jeskai and Oculus, basically the same. Mono red, taking a bit of an increase. And normally you would kind of say, okay, well, some of the Gruul players switched to mono red, but Gruul's about the same. So red just kind of putting up some more results here. Mono white tokens up a little bit from last week. But other than that, Mice and Azorius Omniscience, those are becoming more fringe players. And the 5-color Overlords deck, Cage with a bit of a resurgence, but nothing too noteworthy. Now, as far as deck lists are concerned, we are going to start off with Arcane1, who got second place in a challenge this past weekend. And no, I did not pluck this deck list from a year and a half ago. This is Bant Toxic in the year of our Lord and Savior 2025, with a couple of new upgrades, most notably Mockingbird, which is very cool because for 1 mana, since X can be 0 and you can still copy 1-drops, you can copy Venerated Rot Priest. That's kind of the big one. The other big one is being able to play a Jawbone Duelist that already has built-in flying. That's pretty good. The other new addition here, which you might find a little surprising, is This Town Ain't Big Enough. Normally you associate this with the bounce decks with Storm Chaser's talent, which there is no copies of here. But the really important thing about This Town Ain't Big Enough is it can target 2 of your own things. And because you have Venerated Rot Priest and Mockingbird to copy it, you frequently will have multiple Rot Priests in play, and that is really nice with Town. If you town 2 of your own things with double Rot Priest in play, they both trigger twice, which is 4 poison counters. That adds up very, very quickly. Sheltered by Ghosts, this deck before had a horrendous red matchup. Sheltered, I'm assuming, fixes that quite a bit. And Finn the Fangbearer, which is kind of a weird one. The text on this card is mostly irrelevant. It effectively just has Toxic 2, where it's a 1/3 that has Death Touch, and when it hits them, they get 2 poison counters. There's really nothing else there, but 1/3 Death Touch body, pretty good against the red decks. So expect a video from this deck in the near future, because I played it last night on stream and I kind of crushed people with it. So we'll definitely have that as a video soon. Next up from Hamuda in 3rd place, I believe this was the Sunday challenge. This is kind of the winner's circle, if you want to call it that. The reason I wanted to highlight this deck is the drastic shift in these Gruul decks. A couple of important things. Paw Patch Recruit has moved its way into the main deck. I've even seen lists playing 4 Paw Patch Recruit and no Hired Claw in the main deck. And I think that's a really good change. as these blue-black decks become a lot more popular, and that matchup is kind of rough for the red side of things, you need to find more ways to get 2-for-1s into your deck, and I think Paw Patch is a very good way to do that. The other thing that's worth noting, if you look at this 75, there are no copies of Screaming Nemesis. If you told somebody 3 months ago when Duskmourn came out that red decks in 2025 would have no Screaming Nemesis, they would have laughed at you. But that's just kind of where the metagame is. There's Nowhere to Run is everywhere, and it's really hard to justify playing a 3-mana creature that has no battlefield impact that dies to Nowhere to Run. So we've replaced those with Sentinel of the Nameless City. Not only does it have an enter the battlefield effect in creating a map token, it also has 4 toughness, which means it doesn't die to Nowhere to Run. So just wanted to highlight those changes in the Gruul decks. And now we get to the Spice Corner. Cabeza de Bolo in 9th place they're after my own heart right here. Prof's Eidetic Memory. And this is a shell that is very similar to what I played a lot in a previous standard format, I want to say about a year ago at this point, which was just straight up Dimir Profs. But we actually have a bit of a twist here. So you have the same Profs core of like Steam Core Scholar, Fairy Dream Thief to Surveil, Duels of the Mind which can loot, and all of these ways to kind of put cards into your graveyard to fuel Abhorrent Oculus. The other thing that you have is you can discard the Oculus to then reanimate it with No One Left Behind. And last but certainly not least, you have Invasion of Amonkhet, which both mills enough cards so that you can just cast the Oculus from your hand, but also if you mill the Oculus, you can then get it back with No One Left Behind. Or you can flip the Invasion and then have the Invasion become a copy of the Oculus, and you can do it that way as well. So I haven't played this one yet on stream, but I'm definitely going to have to play it at some point, given that it did so well, and maybe relive the good old glory days of Prof's Eidetic Memory, because I just love this card. I love everything about the design of this card. It's really fun to cast, rewards you for drawing a bunch of extra cards. Who doesn't like that? Come on. So yeah, definitely going to have to play a little bit with this one. And last but not least, from Biz1 in 10th place, a lot of people who are actually making deep runs in these challenges here with Glarb Calamity's Augur. This is, a card that's often forgotten from Loomburrow. I think had a little bit of hype surrounding it when the set first came out, but really hasn't done that much in the time that it's been in Standard. It's a 2/4 Death Touch, and it lets you play lands and spells with mana value 4 or greater from the top of your library. So importantly, what I want to stress here is there's a couple of cards that sort of break the mold in terms of expensive cards you can cast off of Glarb, but also have some utility in the early game. The most important one is Harvester of Misery. You can cast it as a 5-drop off of Glarb, but it's also a kill spell on turn 2. Same exact thing with Virtue Persistence. You can cast it as a 7-drop off of Glarb later in the game, but it is a 2-mana kill spell. So it's a way to get more cheap spells into your deck that isn't more bricks for Glarb when you get later into the game. And the same thing with the Overlords. So the Overlords, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but I'm fairly confident you can impend the Overlord off of Glarb. I haven't 100% looked into that. Please let me know in the comments if that's true. But I'm pretty sure you can, because you're not like casting a different spell. So that's cool as well. And then you have Preacher of the Schism, kind of your traditional Golgari fare. Only 1 Mosswood, which is kind of strange. Thrun, very good against the Dimir decks. Vren the Relentless, just, leaning into that blue splash. And then your typical black kill spells, Cut Down, Go for the Throat. And Black Sun's Twilight, which is kind of an interesting card, but it is a kill spell, and that if X is 5 or greater, you can return a creature with mana value X or less from your graveyard. So really cool deck, got some Jaces in the board. I'm going to have to try this one out too as well. Glarb is a sweet card, and I am excited to give this one a shot. Alrighty, next up we are going to kind of breeze through Pioneer real quick. I will say, now, if you look at last week's metagame, combined between Demons and Prowess, it was almost 40%. This week, if you combine Demons and Prowess, it doesn't even reach 20. So it does kind of seem like the metagame is shifting from week to week. I will mention that these challenges, almost barely fire. There was one of them that had 32 players, and then let me look at the exact counts. So there was 5 challenges. They had number of players were 32, 38, 40, 43, and 39. And we look at top 32 deck lists. So some of these deck lists in the challenge don't have any wins because they're showing every single deck from the challenge. So you got to keep that in mind sometimes. But as far as the data is concerned, a lot less demons, a lot less prowess, a lot more gruel, which kind of weird. It's basically just a standard deck with some Kumano Faces Kakazans and Play with Fires. This is not even the Atarka's Command version. This is just Innkeeper's Talent, Mice, that kind of stuff. So more people have kind of been porting that from standard. Dimir Bounce is another deck that is popping up quite a bit recently, and even some Esper Bounce, which we might take a look at in a second here. And again, these are just glorified standard decks. And I think that's a lot of what people's problems with Pioneer, where it doesn't really have its own identity. It's stealing identities from other formats where people are really just playing standard decks that have a couple of extra good cards in them, for better or worse, depending on your opinion on that. But I got 3 decks for you. So the first one I want to take a look at is from Harry13, who won a challenge with the aforementioned Esper Bounce deck. And yeah, if you take a look at this deck, it's really just a standard deck. Now, there is some major differences. You get to play Thoughtseize. That card's great. Fatal Push as well, so better interaction. You have some more enchantments that you would like to be bouncing. Well, should say, you don't want to target Treacherous Blessing with it this tiny big enough. But Treacherous Blessing is kind of cool with Fear of Isolation, because the way that Fear of Isolation works is you return the enchantment as an additional cost. You're not targeting the enchantment with the bounce of Fear of Isolation, but you are with Pixie in this town, so you got to be a little careful with that. But I think one card that I want to highlight here, and it's a big standout for me, is Legion's Landing. Between Legion's Landing and Storm Chaser's Talent and the 1-drops with Pixie and Scavenger, you have 16 1-mana cards. You can actually flip this thing very quickly, and that leans into your sideboard card, Yorion, where if you are flipping Landing very quickly, you can ramp into a faster Yorion, and you can imagine, Yorion in this deck is absurd. You're bouncing, Flickering Hopeless Nightmare, Nowhere to Run, Storm Chaser's Talent, Treacherous Blessing. You have an endless number of things to get so much value off of. So you do get some pretty big upgrades from standard. That being said, it is still kind of just a standard deck at the end of the day. Apologies for the different layout here. For some reason, this challenge would not load on the Mothership website, so I had to load it in on Goldfish. But Kaikas in 30th place. This is Boros Pia. If you've looked at a Pia deck from, I want to say, how long are people ago playing Pia? There was a resurgence maybe I want to say about a year ago, and this deck list is not really that different than it was a year ago, but whenever somebody plays Pia and it pops up in my feed somewhere, I gotta highlight it, because this is one of my favorite cards of all time. Whenever you play cards from Exile, you get to make a 1/1 Thopter. Those tokens have flying. It's a 2/3, so it doesn't die to Bone Crusher Giant. Just a cool card all around. And then you kind of sort of pop off at the very end of the chain with Showdown of the Scalds. And the other thing that I like about this version is, I didn't mean to click on that Showdown. Showdown puts a bunch of counters on your, you can load up on one creature with Showdown, and then combined with Prowess from Swiss Spear and Soulscar Mage, it kind of makes Monstrous Rage a lot more potent in this deck, which is a tool they didn't have access to before. So shout out to Pia, cool deck, and shout out to Kaikas. And then the last deck I want to show you from Master Brewer, can confirm that name is accurate, in 20th place here with Boggles, but Colossus Hammer? So we have some hexproof creatures in the form of Basara Tower Archer and Glade Cover Scout. This deck is wild. I didn't even notice the red cards at first. So you have those kind of hexproof angles where you can pair with Sigarda's Aid and Colossus Hammer. You have Leyline Axe, which you can pair with Fervent Champion, because Fervent Champion allows you to free equip the Leyline Axe. And then you have, I'm reading this card for the first time ever, Cloudsteel Karen. Equipped creature has flying and you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. Oh, because you can... I see where this is going. You put it on a hexproof creature. That's kind of cool. You have Thran Power Suit, which it's an equipment that gets buffed for each aura and equipment attached to it. You have Sheltered by Ghosts, which is an aura to work for Thran Power Suit. A lot of cool stuff going on here. So shout out to Master Brewer in 28th place. And that is going to put a wrap on Pioneer for the day. And to close out today's video, we are going to take a look at Modern. Now, as I alluded to in the intro, a lot happened this weekend. 8 challenges, which is the normal number that we usually have, which, by the way, it is kind of interesting to me that between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there's 8 Modern challenges, but only 4 Standard and 5 Pioneer. I mean, I understand Modern's a more popular format, but still, it's that disparity is interesting to me. Always has been. Anyways, we have those, plus we have 3 regional championships in Prague, Ottawa, and Brazil, I believe was the third one. And with all of that, Boros Energy, to the surprise of probably not a single person watching this video, is the most played deck at 21.6%. It's up a little bit from last week, and that kind of makes sense because I assumed it was going to be more popular in paper than it was on Magic Online. So if you figure the data sets that we normally use are just for Magic Online results, if you factor in paper data, which if you go to the Prague RC was actually 25% of the metagame, it kind of evens out. So that seems to be about what I expected. Grinding Breach, 10.9%. Honestly, that feels a little bit lower than what I expected. I was thinking Breach was going to be closer to the 15% range after second most played deck behind Boros, but that's not necessarily how it worked out. Temur Eldrazi, 10.3%, and a slight bit of a resurgence. It's kind of been increasing week to week, really ever since the ban. Dimir Oculus took a pretty big dip, which kind of makes sense. I don't think a lot of people... I mean, Oculus was tied for the second most played deck in Prague, but if you expect a lot of Boros, Oculus is not where you want to be, so that kind of makes sense. I've appeased the YouTube comment section, and I have replaced Death and Taxes with Orzhov Blink. So let me know in the comments if you like or dislike that change. I'm sure I'll have some people praising me and some people just saying, how could you cave into the madness? Mardu Energy, slight downtick from 4.5 to 1.9. Belcher, roughly about the same. Ruby Storm, roughly about the same. So no crazy shifts beyond that, really. But yeah, big uptick in Boros. Basically the same everywhere else. Nothing, a little bit of a downtick in Grinding Breach. So for this week's deck lists, the first one that I wanted to show you, this is from a Modern challenge. I believe this was one of the Sunday challenges. And this is actually, it's easier for me to show you this in this format because the other format is MTG Melee, which their website's not great. You'll see that in a second. But this is a deck that was played in the Prague Regional Championships, and it lost in the finals. This is Eldrazi, but not Temur, just Gruul. So the Temur Eldrazi deck is usually playing blue for Null Drifter and then sideboard Consigned to Memories. Sometimes there's maybe like one other blue card in the sideboard, but usually that's what it's there for. This version has eschewed the blue. We've replaced Null Drifter with Writhing Chrysalis, MH3 Draft All-Star, limited, like you could not beat this card in limited. And I wonder if it's maybe good enough for Constructed. It is a 2/3 that upon casting makes 2 Scions, and whenever you sacrifice another Eldrazi, put a counter on it. So it works very well with Kozilek's command, because you can command for a whole bunch, make a bunch of Scions, and then that makes this Chrysalis just completely massive and impossible to kill. I have to imagine it allows you to kind of play a little bit more of an aggressive role in certain matchups where you just play it, sack the Scions immediately, and you have a 4-mana 4/5, and that grows exponentially when you draw more Kozilek's commands and Malevolent Rumbles. And then, of worth noting, this version is playing Karn. There was a bit of a divide in all of the regional championship lists. I feel like, I don't know if it was quite 50-50, but some people had Karn, some people did not. It seems like, to me, the people who did have Karn, on average, performed a little bit better than the people who didn't. And I think part of that is because it's such a huge part of your plan against the Grinding Breach matchup. Maybe your matchup is okay without it, but it certainly is just an absolute hammer against them. They basically are just Unholy Heat it or bust. They really can't beat it when it's on the table, and they don't have a lot of Unholy Heats. At least most of the lists that I saw only played 2. So I think that is a good place to be if you are targeting Breach. Maybe not quite as good against Boros, because Karn a little bit less good against wide boards, and Bridge is not good against a bunch of 1/1s. But that matchup is good enough with K-Return that maybe that doesn't matter that much. So I think this is my preferred version of Eldrazi if you are looking to play in Portland. Now, this is technically the Spice Corner, but I mean, this individual did make the top 32 of a regional championship with Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant. So is it really that much of a spice? Shout out to Par Jones, who played Jund Saga. I mean, you probably could have copy-pasted a Jund Saga list from about a year and a half ago, and this would just be the same thing. We've gotten some new upgrades, Orcish Bowmasters, Fear of Missing Out, there's a Shoot the Sheriff in here, but really this is just Tarmogoyf, Dark Confidant, Ragavan, Thoughtseize, and Fatal Push. You know, a tried and true strategy that's been the backbone of Modern for the better part of the last 12 years. Yeah, shout out to Par. I mean, there's not a ton of notes to say about this. There's some weird numbers here, like 3 Tarmogoyf, 3 Ragavan, you know, the Haywire Might for the Saga, that makes sense, 1 Kroxa, 1 Molten Collapse, a Shoot the Sheriff, and a Holy Heat of Tarfire, really just kind of splitting the removal spells. And then got some Pyroclasms in the board for Boros, some more Saga targets. We have a Meltdown, a Ghost Vacuum, a Graveyard Trespasser, a Turok. You can tell a lot of these numbers were tested. This person seems like they probably put a lot of effort into this deck list, and congratulations to Par for making top 32 with Confidant and Goyf, something I never thought I would say in the year of 2025. Now, we're really getting into the Spice Corner, and by that, I mean, this is a deck that, a version of this deck that I've seen floating around before, but one that I have not yet highlighted in this particular section. This is Dimir Asmo, which a lot of people had kind of pegged Asmo as a card that significantly increases with the unbanning of Mox Opal, and definitely makes a lot of sense. The Underworld Cookbook is a phenomenal enabler for Mox Opal, where if you combine that with Oval Chase Daredevil, you're making a ton of artifacts to turn on the Opal, and then what else can you do with a bunch of artifacts? Time Sieve. And you have Academy and Manufacture to make sure the Cookbook can go big enough to just basically kill with Time Sieve. If you have Cookbook, Time Sieve, and Manufacture, that's 3 artifacts per Cookbook activation. If you can find a second Cookbook, that's just infinite turns right there. And then you're pairing that combo with both Basim and Psychic Frog. Now, previously people have kind of debated which one of these 2 drops is better between Basim and Psychic Frog. I've always been of the opinion that Frog is better. I understand you have Mox Amber, and I understand you have a lot of legends, but Psychic Frog is just a completely messed up card. But, you know, ¿por qué no los dos? Why don't we play both? So it kind of makes sense. They both work pretty well with stuff like, you know, Oval Chase and all the cheap artifacts. So it just kind of makes a lot of sense. 16 lands, but it's really 18 because there's 2 Sink into Stupors. So that seems fine. And then pretty clean sideboard as well. You know, I love Asmo. I don't necessarily think I would consider playing this deck at the RC, but if you want to have some fun and take all the turns, this is a pretty good option. And last but certainly not least, Screenwriter NY, who I feel like is a repeat customer on this particular show, where they just keep bringing the spice. Screenwriter has decided to lose in the finals, so second place in a challenge with Tameshi, but not where you would normally associate Tameshi with Goblin Charbelcher. We're not playing that stuff. We got lands this time. We got plenty of lands. And the idea is that Tameshi plus Lotus Bloom is just an extremely powerful, explosive mana engine that generates near infinite mana. And if you combine those 2 cards with Cultivator Colossus, Tameshi, by way of how the combo works with Lotus Bloom, every time you get the bloom back, you pick up a land. So you generate a ton of mana, you put a Colossus into play, and you have all of the lands that you picked up from Tameshi to then put them back into play, draw a fistful of cards, make a bunch of mana, Colossus again. You can even use Teferi to bounce your Colossus and then go again that way, so you don't even have to have a second Colossus. And then eventually the win condition is generate enough mana to finale for 10, make all of your creatures large, and have haste, and attack your opponent. You have a lot of ways to find the combo with, you know, Wargate can be X equals 0 to find Lotus Bloom. You can do it for 3 to find Tameshi. And it's even a payoff where you can just do it for 7 to go find the Colossus. And same thing with Green Sun Zenith. Although it's a little awkward because you can't Zenith for Tameshi, you can still get, you know, Dryad Arbor, Sakura Tribe Elder for ramp, Halfling as more ramp spells, and then it's a payoff in the form of Colossus. So yeah, interesting. And then Rumbles as well. Rumble plus Shifting Woodlands kind of cool because you can like Woodlands the Tameshi on the combo turn. Some cool stuff you can do there. But shout out to Screenwriter NY as always. keep on bringing the spice. And that is going to put a wrap on another episode of Watching the Meta. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you thought. Consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy the content. And until next week, adios.